and I know what I've got to be. We don't say goodbye.
It started with a song that wasn't meant to be just another hit. It was supposed to be a bridge between generations, between worlds, between two artists who on paper couldn't have been more different. When Barry Gibb sent Celine Dion the demo of Immortality, he thought he was offering her a piece of his heart, a melody carved out of memory, grief, and faith. To him, the song was a confession. To her, it was a challenge. Because behind the beauty of Immortality lay something deeper, a quiet storm of pride, artistry, and emotion. Barry Gibb, the eldest of the Bee Gees, a man who'd written songs that defined the 20th century, was entrusting his legacy to a woman whose voice could shatter glass and silence arenas. But when Celine heard it, she didn't just sing it, she owned it. And that to Barry was both breathtaking and terrifying. Soon, what began as a collaboration turned into a creative tug-of-war, not over money, not over fame, but over the very soul of the song. Because Immortality wasn't just about living forever through music, it was about how and who gets to be remembered. And before the world ever heard a single note, two icons were quietly fighting to shape eternity in their own image. But what neither of them knew was that Immortality would outlive their differences and come to haunt them both in ways they could never have imagined. You're watching RetroWaves, where music's greatest legends never fade away. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's uncover the truth behind one of the most haunting songs of the 90s and the unspoken feud that almost broke it before it began. By the late 1990s, the music world was shifting. The glossy pop of the 80s had given way to powerful ballads and emotional storytelling, and at the center of it all stood Celine Dion, the woman whose voice could stop time. Fresh off the worldwide success of My Heart Will Go On, she was unstoppable. Her tone, pure, precise, almost surgical, had become the new gold standard. To audiences, she was invincible, but to other artists, she was intimidating. And then, thousands of miles away in Miami, Barry Gibb sat alone in his studio, staring at a blank sheet of staff paper. He'd written hundreds of songs. How Deep Is Your Love? To Love Somebody, Stayin' Alive. Songs that shaped entire generations. But something about the 90s felt different. The Bee Gees' sound had become a relic of another time. The falsettos that once ruled disco were now treated like museum pieces. Barry wanted relevance again, not to chase charts, but to prove that the Bee Gees still had something sacred left to say. And in a burst of inspiration one night, he found it. He called Robin and Maurice into the room. Within minutes, the three brothers had shaped a melody so ethereal, it barely felt human. They called it Immortality, and before the song was even finished, Barry whispered, "This one's for Celine." When the demo reached her team, the response was instant. Admiration, awe, and a single hesitation. The song was heavy, too heavy. It wasn't a love song or a radio single. It was a farewell disguised as a hymn. Lines like "I'll make my journey through eternity," and "I have learned to love, I'll be my own reflection," felt like the closing words of a life story, something written by a man staring into the mirror of his own legacy. Celine understood the weight of it. She admired Barry deeply, but she also knew what her fans expected: clarity, triumph, emotional precision. Barry wanted something messier, something human, and that's where the first cracks began to show. When she accepted the song, she did it with reverence, but also with caution. She didn't just want to sing it, she wanted to perfect it. Barry, on the other hand, didn't want perfect. He wanted pain. He wanted the kind of voice that trembled under the truth. And when these two worlds collided in a London studio, the result wasn't harmony. It was something far more complicated, a fragile dance between vulnerability and control. Because Immortality wasn't just about surviving through art, it was about surrender, and neither Celine nor Barry was ready to do that. The recording session for Immortality was meant to be legendary. Celine Dion, the Bee Gees, a collaboration between two eras of brilliance. The producers were already whispering about Grammy potential before a single note was recorded. But inside the walls of London's Paradise Studios, the atmosphere was different, quieter, heavier, charged with an energy that no one could name. Celine arrived first, dressed simply, her hair tied back, her trademark mug of tea in hand. She warmed up in silence, eyes closed, breathing deeply through the melody. Her team hovered around her, careful not to disturb her ritual. She approached every song as if it were sacred. Then, the door opened. Barry Gibb entered, sunglasses on, a gentle smile hiding something restless beneath. He'd been in countless studios, written songs for everyone from Barbra Streisand to Diana Ross. But this was different. This was Celine. And deep down, Barry knew this song. This one might define his later years. He greeted her warmly, but his eyes darted toward the piano. He wasn't there for small talk. He wanted to feel the song again, before anyone tried to control it. "Let's make something real," he said. Celine smiled, confident, always. The first take was flawless. Every note from her lips sounded crystalline, perfectly balanced, the kind of performance most singers could only dream of capturing. But when the final note faded, Barry didn't move. He just sat there, head tilted, brow furrowed. Finally, he said softly, "It's beautiful, but it's too perfect." Celine turned, unsure if she'd heard him right. "Too perfect?" Barry continued. "It needs to ache, Celine. It needs to break a little." That was the first time the air shifted. Not out of anger, but misunderstanding. Celine lived for perfection. She saw it as discipline, respect, craftsmanship. Barry lived for emotion. He saw it as truth, even when it was messy. And Immortality, a song about living forever, was suddenly pulling them in opposite directions. As the days went on, their sessions became a delicate battle. Barry would close his eyes, strumming softly as Celine sang. Every take shimmered with control, powerful, steady, divine. And every time he'd whisper the same thing, "It's still not human enough." Celine's team began to grow tense. She wasn't used to being told to feel less perfect. She gave her all to every performance, every note deliberate, every vowel shaped like glass. But Barry didn't want glass. He wanted fire. He wanted the sound of a woman standing at the edge of time. One engineer would later say, it was like watching a painter and a sculptor trying to finish the same statue. At one point, Barry asked her to drop her vibrato, to sing raw, unpolished. Celine hesitated. "That's not me," she said gently. "My voice has to fly." Barry smiled faintly. Sometimes the most beautiful notes don't fly. They fall. For a long moment, they stared at each other through the studio glass. No anger, just two souls seeing art from different galaxies. She tried another take. This time she let go. Not entirely, but enough. Her voice cracked ever so slightly on the line. "Fulfill your destiny," and Barry's eyes widened. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the pain I was talking about." But when the take ended, Celine shook her head. "It's flawed," she said. He smiled. "Exactly. They weren't fighting for dominance, they were fighting for meaning, and in doing so, they began to expose the heart of Immortality, a song too big, too eternal, to belong to either of them alone. By the third day, even the silence between takes carried weight. The air was thick, not with ego, but with emotion. The engineers whispered that the tension was unspoken but undeniable. Celine's eyes were often glassy after a take, her lips pressed tightly as if holding back something deeper. Barry paced the control room like a man haunted by ghosts. He knew why the song mattered so much. His brothers Robin and Maurice were still alive, but the years had changed them all. The Bee Gees' fame had been both a crown and a curse, and Barry, more than anyone, understood what it meant to outlive your own legend. When he wrote Immortality, he wasn't writing for charts, he was writing for memory, for the promise that even when the body fades, the voice remains. That's why he needed it to sound human, not flawless, not divine, human. Celine couldn't have known it then, but she would come to understand. Years later, when she faced her own loss, the death of her husband René, Immortality would take on a meaning that no vocal perfection could contain, but for now, she was still chasing the perfect take, unaware that perfection was never the point. When the final session ended, Barry left quietly. He didn't say goodbye, not out of pride but because he didn't trust his voice. He sat in his car, chain-smoking, replaying Celine's last take in his head. It was magnificent, and yet, he still felt something missing, something no studio could fix. Inside, Celine stayed behind. She listened to the playback alone, staring into the darkness of the sound booth. For the first time, she felt the song's weight press down on her. This wasn't a performance anymore. It was a mirror, one reflecting all the fear, loss, and hope that come with being remembered. She whispered the final line to herself, "Fulfill your destiny." And for a moment, she wondered if Barry had written it for her or for himself. When Immortality was released the following year, it soared across charts in Europe and beyond. But behind the applause, behind the accolades, something unspoken lingered, a creative silence that neither Barry nor Celine ever publicly explained. To the world, it was a collaboration between two legends. To those who were there, it was something else entirely, a spiritual duel that ended not with victory, but with understanding. When Immortality finally reached the world, the result was undeniable. It was haunting, beautiful, unforgettable. Celine Dion's voice soared over the Bee Gees' harmonies like light through stained glass. For listeners, it was a perfect union, but for the artists who made it, the silence that followed spoke volumes. There were no bitter interviews, no dramatic statements, only absence. Barry Gibb never publicly commented on the sessions. Celine moved on to her next record, and just like that, Immortality was released into the world, as if it had written itself. Behind closed doors, though, something had changed. Barry went back to Miami, retreating into his private studio. The Bee Gees were entering what would become their final years together. The brothers were growing older, and the idea of immortality, that word, that song, began to echo more painfully with each passing day. For Celine, life accelerated. Her fame grew to impossible heights. The Titanic theme had turned her into a global phenomenon, and Immortality was absorbed into that wave, a quieter, more introspective jewel among her louder triumphs. But she never forgot it. She often said it was one of the most emotional songs she'd ever recorded, and perhaps she knew that its meaning would change with time. The years that followed were unkind to Barry Gibb. In 2003, Maurice Gibb, his younger brother, his right hand died suddenly from complications during surgery. The Bee Gees as a trio ended that day. The sound that once ruled the world fell silent. Barry was devastated. Robin tried to continue, but the bond that defined them had been broken. And now, that word, immortality, returned like a ghost. He listened to the song again one night, years after its release. Celine's voice trembled through the speakers, singing the words he'd written for her. "Fulfill your destiny." He whispered it back, tears in his eyes. Barry later said that certain songs feel like they were written by someone else, as if they come from another realm. Immortality was one of them, and in his grief he realized why it mattered so much back then. He hadn't written it for Celine, he'd written it for the Bee Gees, for the brothers who'd spent their lives chasing eternal melody. Robin passed away in 2012, and Barry, the last Gibb standing, found himself living the very thing he'd written about. He was immortalized in music, yes, but he was alone. By the time Robin died, Celine Dion was living her own quiet tragedy. Her husband, René Angelil, the man who had guided her career since she was a teenager, was battling cancer. She stood by him through every treatment, every fragile moment, until his death in 2016. That same year, she lost her brother just 2 days later. It was as if grief had moved into her home and refused to leave, and in the depths of that sorrow, the meaning of immortality returned to her. She began performing it again, but now it sounded different. The precision was gone. In its place was pain, tenderness, truth. Exactly what Barry Gibb had wanted all along. What had once been a creative clash was now a shared understanding, the kind that only loss can teach. For Barry, immortality had been a warning. For Celine, it became a comfort, and for both, it was prophecy. In 2017, at the Grammy tribute Stayin' Alive, a salute to the music of the Bee Gees, the world watched as time seemed to fold back on itself. The stage glowed with soft light. Barry Gibb sat in the front row, his face half hidden by shadow. The audience fell silent as the first notes began. It was Immortality, and the voice singing it was Celine Dion's. She walked slowly across the stage, her gown shimmering under the lights. Every word, every breath carried years of history. Her voice, once immaculate, trembled with emotion. It was no longer about control, it was about connection. As she sang the line, "Fulfill your destiny," she walked down into the crowd, directly toward Barry. The cameras caught him staring back, eyes glistening. Celine reached out her hand, and in that silent moment, two stories, two lifetimes, finally met again. No feud, no bitterness, just understanding. Barry stood, and as she finished the song, he applauded, tears slipping down his cheeks. The audience rose to their feet, and for once the applause wasn't just for the performance. It was for everything that came before it, the creative tension, the distance, the grief, the healing. That night, Immortality became something greater than either of them had imagined. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a shared memory of everything they'd lost and everything they'd created that would never die. The applause from that 2017 tribute seemed endless. Celine had already stepped off the stage, but her voice, that trembling, celestial voice, still hung in the air like perfume. Barry Gibb sat frozen in his seat. He wasn't clapping, he wasn't smiling, he was feeling. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, he finally understood what the song had become. Back in 1998, Immortality was just a melody, a haunting reflection of fear and faith. But tonight, it had transformed into something else, something almost divine. Because the woman who once sang it with perfect control now sang it with heartbreak, and the man who once wrote it to escape mortality now sat face to face with it. Celine's voice cracked on the final chorus. A single note wavered. Soft, fragile, real. The crowd gasped, but Barry smiled. That imperfection, that trembling, it was exactly what he had wanted all those years ago. He leaned forward, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes, and whispered to himself, "Now you understand, Celine. Now you feel it." And maybe she did, because when she looked at him in the audience, she didn't see the songwriter who once pushed her to be raw. She saw a man who had lost almost everything, his brothers, his band, his past, and somehow was still here, still singing through her voice. That's when she reached out her hand toward him. No words, no script, just one simple gesture that said everything: forgiveness, respect, and shared immortality. When the cameras cut and the audience dispersed, Barry stayed in his seat, unmoving. He wasn't basking in nostalgia, he was reliving it. Every memory of late nights with Robin and Maurice, every recording booth where laughter once echoed, every song that began as a whisper and ended as a lifetime. It was all there, crashing down in the silence. A few minutes later, Celine appeared backstage. She was quiet, almost hesitant. Gone was the confidence of a global icon. In its place stood a woman stripped to her soul. When she saw Barry, she didn't say a word. She just walked up to him and wrapped her arms around him. He broke instantly, his composure gone. He whispered, "I never knew it would mean this much." Celine smiled through her tears. "It means everything." and in that quiet, sacred moment, the so-called feud died. There was never really anger, only two perfectionists standing on opposite sides of emotion, two artists searching for the same truth in different languages. Barry's raw honesty, Celine's divine precision, together they had created a song that would outlive them both. They stayed like that for a while, no cameras, no applause, just the hum of the air conditioner and two hearts finally at peace with what they had made. Years passed and life carried on, but that night remained untouched, frozen in the hearts of everyone who saw it. Barry would later admit in interviews that grief never leaves you, you just learn to build around it. He said music was the only thing that kept him alive, and that sometimes songs write you before you even know what they mean, and Immortality was exactly that, a song written before its time, before the losses, before the pain, before the understanding. For Celine, it became a mirror. Each time she sang it afterward, it was softer, slower, as if she were speaking to ghosts, her husband, her brother, her past self. And in those moments, she was no longer the woman of perfection, she was the woman Barry had wanted her to be. Vulnerable, human, eternal. Their feud, if you could even call it that, was never about ego, it was about vision. Barry saw Immortality as a cry from the heart, Celine saw it as a monument of art. In the end, both were right, because that combination, pain and precision, made it unforgettable, and maybe that's what real immortality is, not living forever, but leaving something that does. Today, Immortality still finds new listeners, some too young to remember when it first played on the radio. They don't know about the tension behind it, or the moments of silence in the studio, or the tears that came years later. They just hear a song that sounds like a prayer. And maybe that's how it should be, because the truth is, Immortality was never meant to belong to Barry or to Celine. It belonged to time, it belonged to memory, it belonged to everyone who's ever loved, lost, and hoped their story might somehow continue after they're gone. Barry once said that the hardest part of being the last Gibb is waking up and realizing there's no one left who remembers the beginning, but he was wrong about that. Celine remembered. Every time she sang that song, she carried a piece of the Bee Gees with her, and in return, Barry carried a piece of her heart in every word he wrote. They had both learned the same painful truth. You can chase perfection, but only pain makes it real. You can lose everything and still leave behind a sound that never fades. Because immortality isn't about fame, it's about resonance, the sound that lingers long after the applause is gone. If you listen closely to Immortality, you'll still hear it, that trembling harmony where Barry's ghostly voice meets Celine's shining one, two worlds, forever intertwined in a single breath. It's not just a song anymore, it's proof that even when voices fade, truth remains, because legends don't live forever, they echo. If you love this story, you'll want to hear what happened when Barry Gibb made a promise he almost couldn't keep, and how it nearly broke him. I'll see you there, only on RetroWaves.